They're crucial. In an earlier video, I talked about how the use of the emergent assessment system, which I call the criterion scale for assessing writing, the constant use of that on children's work enabled me to actually discover that there were 4 key toolkits that children need to be very skilled in order to become great writers. And if they have significant weaknesses in any one of those toolkits, it can hold them back. And we'd never been told to teach writing like that before. We were given far more complex subdivisions for the skills that we were to teach in writing. From those 4 toolkits, I was then able to look at the outcomes and say, well, how well do we teach them as teachers? So the first toolkit was, what is the type of text that you're wanting the children to write and the purpose of it and the audience. And since the national strategies, which I was very glad to see go in their formal sense, but since then we have understood far better how to teach different types of writing and writing for different purposes. There is also the need for the children to be able to actually express themselves fluently in language, manipulating language, choosing vocabulary carefully, using a wide range of sentence openers and connectives for extension, the teaching of writing voice. And as I've already said in an earlier video, realised we weren't teaching that one at all. There's the stimulus, of course, and that's crucially important because the stimulus is, why are the children writing? What are they trying to achieve through this piece of writing? And how interesting or exciting does it need to be for the audience that are going to read it? And of course, stimulus, particularly for creative or expressive writing, is crucial. And some teachers do an outstanding job of coming up with a really exciting range of stimuli for their children to write to. And then finally, there's the mechanics of writing. There's the basic skills. The how do you actually produce a piece of writing? What is happening when you're doing this on a piece of paper with a pen or a pencil? And that's quite fascinating, because what you're actually doing is you're manipulating 4 different skills that kind of marry and come out through your pen tip onto the piece of paper all at the same time. The first one is your handwriting. And every one of us has been taught handwriting in school, and every single school, primary school today, teaches handwriting. The school has some autonomy on what the handwriting style will be. They're allowed to choose, they're encouraged to choose. There are resources out there you can buy. Most teachers, I'm glad to say, do promote cursive writing from an early age. Many actually introduce the flick onto the first print so that it's quite easy for the children to gradually join it up. But if they're opting for a handwriting scheme, they tend to go for the schemes that keep it nice and simple, without too many curls and twizzles and trails and fancy joins, because they make the handwriting more complex to produce, and they can also make it harder to read, harder to decode, especially if the child is still in the learning stage. So choosing that handwriting scheme is important. What schools need to do is keep up the handwriting practice, and it does only need to be 10 minutes a week. And for the children in the class who've already achieved beautiful, neat cursive writing that flows quickly, the point of cursive writing is so that you get that rapid flow, so that writing is quick. The process of writing shouldn't get in the way of writing. But those children could be presenting They could choose a poem, they could write a poem, they could be presenting something that they were doing in history or in geography in that 10 minutes for the practice in handwriting. Now here, usually someone would interrupt and say, but why are we doing that when everybody's working on technology now? All writing is processed. No, there has been some huge research, even recently, that says that it is the process of handwriting, using a pen or pencil, is embedding the learning in the brain for future use. And that same process does not happen when the child is tapping on keys on a word processor. And there's also a lot of evidence that it can affect the degree of creativity as well. So there is a place for both, but we must never lose the gift of beautiful handwriting. There's always the day the technology doesn't work anyway. Besides the handwriting, they've got to learn to spell. They have got to be able to spell almost all vocabulary accurately, because particularly in English, the rules of spelling are broken more often than they're followed. And so a child is not going to necessarily recognise a word in your writing if you're using your own idiosyncratic spelling of that word. We all need to be spelling it the same way so that we can all read it the same way. So the teaching of spelling is crucial. And for me, there are still lists available. There are still the word lists that the former strategies produced, but better still, there are some lists available called the Deutsch lists, which you can still find through the internet. And they have been around since the 1930s, and they were based on very profound research into the level of words that are used at different ages by children as they grow from the age of 2 or 3 right through to 19, 20 and young adulthood. And that research was rigorous and it was powerful. And it was really, in my opinion, a very mistaken move when England opted not to use the Deutsch lists for spelling when they introduced the strategies, but to come up with their own word lists, which have some very debatable words in them based on no research at all, such as spell the word secretary. Well, how many times does a primary school child need to write the word secretary? There are far more important words that they need than that. But there are some fabulous resources that will help with the teaching of spelling. And there are word lists on the internet. But just a word of caution about spelling, teaching spelling for its own use, because I was in a school not too long ago with another colleague, and there was a delightful child came to share with us that she'd won her next certificate on a fabulous electronic spelling program that the school had invested in. And every time they learned their next 50 words or whatever, they got a certificate, and she was thrilled to bits. And you know, there were some wonderful words on those lists. I was impressed. Some real wow words that I would want children to know too. But then all of a sudden, my colleague said, "Well, that's a fabulous word. What does it mean?" And this girl just looked at her and laughed and said, "I don't know, but I can spell it." She said, "Well, what does the next one mean?" She said, "Oh, no." She said, "Well, do you know what any of them mean?" She said, "No, we don't have to know what they mean. We just spell them." Well, what use is that? How can they use them again if they don't know what they mean? Why do they need to spell them if they don't know what they mean? So any spelling program must be tied in with using those words and playing games with those words. So it's not a race anymore. It's not that I want you to learn 100 words this week. It's that I'd like you to learn 10 words and really know them and know what they mean and be able to use them in sentences. If I say make me up a sentence about, you can use it and put that word in. If I say make me up a sentence about, make me up a sentence about. in any lesson at all, I can suddenly say, and can you use that word in it? And I want the children to know what it means and be able to retrieve it and be able to use it. So it's being careful when you're teaching the whole thing about spelling, that you're tying it in with the child's vocabulary. Then there is the learning of grammar. Now, historically, we had always had teachers teaching spelling and teaching handwriting. And we now are advocating teaching voice through structures like VCLP. But the whole thing about grammar has gone sadly wrong. We always should have taught grammar. I saw way back in the 1990s when I was auditing that writing across the whole of a large local authority, that children's grammar was dragging down the level of their writing. Their handwriting was dragging it down, their spelling was dragging it down, the grammar was dragging it down. And that was because they didn't talk grammatically correctly. If the voice that's talking away in my head all the time, we all have a voice going in our heads, it talks to us all day long. Do you fancy a cup of tea? Shall I watch a bit of TV? Shall I take a break? Do I need the loo? If that voice is talking grammatically correctly, then I will write grammatically correctly. But if it's making grammar errors, I will make grammar errors in my writing. Because most children, when they're writing, they are so concentrating on the genre, the purpose, the audience, the stimulus, the what's that they've got to write, that they forget about the hows. And they need to be programmed. The basic skills need to be programmed. They should do neat, accurate handwriting automatically. It's called automaticity these days. They should spell accurately automatically, which means lots and lots of practice and games and fun with it. And they need to be able to structure language grammatically correctly, and they will do that through learning to talk grammatically correctly. They do not have to know that if they're opening their sentence with a lovely ly word like clearly, they don't have to know that's called a fronted adverbial. How does that contribute to their writing? And for some children, that's taking up a little bit of brain power that they desperately need for more language to come out in their writing. So I'm afraid this formal teaching of grammar in primary schools is misplaced and misunderstood. Just teach the children to talk correctly. And finally, make sure they know the full range of 11 pieces of punctuation, how they all work, what they all do, and that again, they can make up sentences. It can all be oral work. Doesn't mean they do more writing. Make up sentences to demonstrate how you would use those pieces of punctuation accurately. And of course, the games we play where children are reading short passages or sentences that have no punctuation at all, and they have to say the changes they make and draw them with the writing finger. And that's great practice too. Anytime children are using that finger, particularly on surfaces that have different textures, then they are getting direct nerve endings straight to brain, and they're more likely to remember it. So, long answer to a short question. Hope it helped. No more slop. Never, ever, ever accept sloppy writing from your children. If they can write neatly, they must write neatly. If they can spell, they must spell. If they can punctuate, they must punctuate. And if they can talk grammatically correctly, they must when they're writing. Because it's about programming in the brain. It's about getting that automaticity so that the conscious brain can totally focus on the what's, the genre, the stimulus, the purpose, the audience, those qualities.